always eyes watching you, and the voice enveloping you. Asleep or awake, indoors or out of doors, in the bath or bed, no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters in your skull. Throughout the genre of science fiction and to its extent fantasy, there have been multiple instances in which forms of these medias have had direct impacts on the popular or mainstream culture and in turn affecting society as a whole. Well, I could go on about how Star Trek or Star Wars has, in my opinion, had great transformations on the genre. I personally don't think that they have had the greatest impacts. The most impactful form of science fiction, in my opinion, that has shaped modern contemporary society was the infamous 1949 dystopian novel by George Orwell, 1984. And yes, I am fully aware that there are dozens upon dozens of other video essays going along the same lines of this. And by all means, watch them. I think they all make pretty good points. And while making this, since making this, I've been scrolling through YouTube and I'm finding 4 or 5 of them pop up. But by all means, they are all arguing that pretty much along the same lines as that this book, despite its age, has without a doubt been arguably the most harrowing and impactful feature of the science fiction genre, serving as on almost Nietzsche's parable of the madman style and serving as a harbinger for our modern day society. There's multiple articles, like Bolin in 2017, Chin and Yang in 2019, De Oliveira Moraes, I apologize for the name, 2021, and Spurgeon in 2009, that all conclude that this novel, in one way or another, has played a pivotal role in shaping our modern society. By looking at the themes from this novel, you could see the parallels to our modern day society. And while it is very macabre to look at, I feel like we need to address it. I don't care how many times it's stuck into your head. We need to address this so that we can make our world for the better. Because if we don't, it's not looking pretty. So Chen and Yang's state in the beginning of their 2019 article titled "The Impact of Media Censorship, 1984 or Brave New World," quote, "Media censorship is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes. While it is commonly seen in countries across the world that are, in one shape or another, ruled by authoritarian regimes, for examples, see North Korea and Russia, that intense media censorship has been used on the general population as a means of controlling overall support for the ruling party. Throughout the novel, the only form of state media coverage comes from the Ministry of Truth, which is just pumping out vast quantities of pro-INGSOC, which it was English socialist propaganda, while at the same time twisting the minds of the population through, you see, the 2 minutes hate into essentially becoming slaves to the propaganda machine. Um, while it is, while I understand that press mediaship, it's always going to be around, was always going to be around, and it was around well before the um, time of George Orwell. I still think it. I think the way that it is that while yes, it is original. While yes, it is uh, while it is still prevalent and it would still be here today, I think that that the way that this work is done, it kind of shaped how we view it nowadays, and you'll see that with other forms that we'll talk about later, such as altering of historical records and the creation of a surveillance state. Um, but anyway, when traveling to these authoritarian countries, you're going to be just going to be just treated to this vast amount of sanitized political propaganda. And in Chin and Yang's article, they conducted a social experiment to look at the effects of these kinds of these political propagandas on and look at the correlations between available of outside news sources to test the overall effectivity of censorship at restricting the information acquisition or the general trend towards going to these more sanitized news records. What they did was they pooled two groups of students from universities across China, and they had one group that would only that had only news access like normal, which was just state news medias for I think it was for like some minor topic. But then the control group, they had multiple outside sources that got through the Chinese firewall at their hands, so they could use that. And the results were not that good in a sense, or no, I shouldn't say they weren't good. The study found that even in the most liberal universities in China, the availability of outside sources did not have a major impact on the demand for uncensored information when in comparison to the normal censored stuff. These results are absolutely haunting because it emphasizes the fact that groups of people, when constantly being exposed to one form of news media throughout their entire life, will prefer only that one source that they were exposed to. Um, these findings make it all the more important that if possible, don't restrict yourself to consuming one form of news media because it will always forever twist your mind into thinking that you have to see it this certain way when in instance you have to view it from multiple angles that is not censored. And I think that was one of the big points that was maybe not, well, no, it was addressed in the book, that this this warping of the news and facts, um, that you see in the characters that they just, for most of the characters, they just soak it up like it's always the thing. The double think is in a sense how they keep that under control, and we need to prevent that from happening. And that's kind of what this critique of the book, or not the critique on the society that George Orwell was trying to provide for us. Um, while the censorship of news media outlets is one of the means that was used in the book that could show how an authoritarian regime could control a country, another horrible approach is the sanitization of historical accounts. George Orwell wrote in 1984, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." This kind of has that history is written by the victors sense of things, and oftentimes in countries that are Orwellian in design, they will tend to alter historical records to reflect that of their belief system. Whether it's to the extreme of Orwell will of Airstrip One depends on where you go. In pretty much any country, depending on which form of historical accounts you get, wherever you go, you will find some form of sanitized history. It's just an inevitable part of society. There's no other way to say it. Um, they'll again, like with the news media, these whoever's trying to alter these historical records to portray their certain philosophical ideals will they're just trying to push it on other people so that they can follow them more closely. Therefore, it's crucial that historians need to provide an accurate account of the past, or else we are destined to repeat it out in its bloody cycle over and over again. Paul Paul Boland's 2017 article, the for the future, for the unborn, considerations of history and historians for art educators, generated from George Orwell's 1984. While applying the novel toward while this specific article is applying it towards art historians, it could still he emphasizes that yes, while it is generally geared towards art, it's the same themes should be taken from any form of historian. The linked connectivity of the past and present can be enriched through the historian's use of range and available materials of the past. You see this in the book. In 1984, Ministry of Truth, they deeply altered the historical accounts so that people living in Airstrip One and Oceania will only see that, for instance, I remember from the book, one of the very, when Winston was working at the Ministry of Truth, one of the things he was recalling was that at one point they had to change the account to saying that the party were responsible for creating airplanes. So they would find every account that would emphasize the original inventors of the airplane, which were still the Wright brothers, and then they shifted it to saying that the party created it, and people buy it. Um, we see these similar tactics being used all over the world where they're retconning history, and this is very, very dangerous because, like what we see in 1984, if we don't address these problems, there's just going to be a disaster, and we're going to be put in a situation where we're once up again playing with the idea of authoritarianism, which is a very slippery slope. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. 1984. The main function of the book was to emphasize the horrors of authoritarian regime to the free world. While authoritarianism was nothing new prior to the publication of the novel, it's definitely altered how we see autocracies. As previously mentioned, censorship of media and historical records are tactics that we see in the book that are oftentimes used in our world. I can't emphasize this enough. I do recognize that this is always going to be a fact of life, but it's personally how I think that these facts are shaped by the book. So the way we see them nowadays, we wouldn't be seeing them the same way without this book. Um, one of the I think one of the most telltale signs that was serving as the parable of the madman was the creation of the called supervised surveillance states. In wake of the September 11th attacks, a sweeping range of structural changes in many of the countries in the free world were designed so that they could attempt to prevent another one of these disasters from happening. Passing of the Patriot Act, the rapid increase of the NSA, and increase in the amount of funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Um, they, it's left people who grew up in the aftermath of these attacks feeling like they're constantly being watched by the government. And we see in the popular culture where one of the best reoccurring memes that I've seen recently is the wave at your FBI agent who's looking at you through your phone. And again, those are conspiracies slash, but it's the fact that we feel like we're constantly being watched by our own government and how it's infringing on our inherent rights, but in the nationalism that came after these events, the government doesn't really care about it, and they'll keep doing it. Garreau's 2015 article, Totalitarian Paranoia in the Post-Orwellian Surveillance States, argument supports this observation by highlighting that the dangers of microphones, video cameras, and TVs that watch us in order to suggest how these older modes of surveillance are surprisingly limited when compared with the varied means now available for spying on people. The, le- the leaks by Edward Snowden have unearthed a terrifying prospect that the free world is beginning to lose cohesion at the seams, and by enabling um, these infringements on privacy, uh, like at the quote from the beginning of the paper from 1984, that will eventually be left to the point where nothing is truly safe except in the few centimeters inside your skull. So whatever you do, no matter where you are, you're going to be watched by the government, and this could be the first step into something much more dangerous for the benefit slash health of mankind. In conclusion, we are looking into the void of something extremely dangerous. George Orwell's 1984 was created to warn us that to warn our society that if we do not address the crises of our times and address the problems that were prevalent in his period, we're only destined to repeat it. It would end up with situations like we would create a true Orwellian state. And unfortunately for much of us, this this novel has just become a foretelling of the 21st century, with the just the amount of private features that we once took for granted have just been lost, and then the increase in strong men trying to take power, and the amount of hate going towards each other in the media, and then with media censorship. I, I cannot help but feel as if George Orwell was the Nietzsche of the modern day. While authoritarianism, media censorship, the surveillance of the people was nothing new to George Orwell. He was around for World War II, and he based what he saw off of the post-war Soviets and post-war America. Without, I think, they would definitely still be around. Um, these concepts will never go away. But I think what the most important takeaway from this book is that we the way we see authoritarianism, censorship, and the surveillance of the populations, they come directly from the world of Airstrip One and Oceania. Um, and I mean, it's shaped our modern vernacular. We talk about Orwellian states, where the government constantly watches its people, and there's nothing that they could really do about it. Um, this book should serve as a call to action to us in the modern age to prevent these problems so that we don't fall once again into a dark age in human history. And yes, while today's discussion was rather dark because it addresses the decline in our modern society, I think we need to know that without these points, it's just it's just like you we have to acknowledge the fact that this book, and everything around George Orwell's writing, um, has just just dramatically impacted our society, whether it's for good or for bad. You have to take into account that we there's blood on our hands if we do not fix the problems of the modern generation, because if we don't, we're setting up the future to fail. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 plus 2 makes 4. If that is granted, all else follows. I'd like to thank you all for sticking through me through the rest of this year and listening to my podcasts. I know they're not the most professional in their structuring, but I feel like each of these points that I've made through all of my podcasts, I I know a lot of them are generally shared, but I feel like it's good to get them all out into the open and off of my chest so they're not bottled up. Good luck to everybody else, and see you later.